joining me here tonight as we're going to talk about quilting plans for perfect fit. Now, real quick, let me hop over on my Facebook and make sure that I can see this so that I know y'all will be able to see me, and also so I'll be able to see your comments once I actually start tonight's slideshow. Now, before I actually start tonight's slideshow, I want to make sure that you guys know that we've got a number of events kicking off this weekend. So we have, well, let me get this pinned, and then that way I can think and talk at the same time instead of trying to do 17 things at one time. All right. So kicking off this weekend, we have 3 events. As you guys may remember, if you've been around here for a hot minute, I created a large calendar of virtual events in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are all at home. We're actually quarantined here at the Night House. Not so much in like an official sense, as Jim was sick this weekend and I ended up taking him to the ER, and heaven knows what we came in contact with. That and the fact that he has some sort of virus. It is not believed to be coronavirus, but we have no tests in the city of Atlanta. So to keep everyone safe, we are quarantining. This is day 3. I'm not gonna lie, it's already getting long. And it's mostly just getting long because of my ankle and the rain more than anything else. I think if I could take myself out for a nice walk or a nice jog, that would go a long way. But anyway, as a result, we need things to look forward to, right? Guys, I see some of you hopping on. Say hi in the comments as you hop on, okay? We need things to look forward to. We need excuses to gather virtually. I've been doing virtual happy hours with some of my friends that are, kind of like the not string and story version of social hour. If you're part of the Quilting Rockstars Facebook group, we have social hour on Saturday night, kind of like that. And that's been just a sanity saver. So in an effort to pair the social things and the sewing things, we have a bunch of stuff kicking off this weekend. Hey, Joe, I'm so glad that you're here. We'll catch you soon, okay? So we have the Stay Home and Sew finish along. It was the spring 2020 finish along when I first announced it a week and a half ago. But as we all globally are under increasing shelter at home encouragements and mandates, Stay Home and Sew seemed an appropriate name. So the Stay Home and Sew finish along will do 3 works in progress over 6 weeks. And if you complete all 3 of your whips, you'll have the chance to win a seat in the fall 2020 Free Motion Quilting Academy. We also have the Dogwood Blossoms quilt along. So that's one of my patterns. We'll be stitching the tops together. I will probably give some instruction on actually quilting that too. I've not included that on the schedule at this point, just because honestly, planning things too far out feels like a bit much since we don't really know what's going to be going on, right? But we'll definitely be getting the tops together, and then, they'll need to be quilted. So I'm sure we'll chat about that. And there's also a workshop this weekend. It's an intro to AccuQuilt workshop, and we're going to be cutting out the Dogwood Blossoms quilt. So if you've never actually cut out a whole quilt with your AccuQuilt before, and you're not even really sure where to start, and you want me to talk you through, like, here's how I knew what dies you guys would need, here's how we're going to go about doing this. Here's how to take yardage and kind of reduce it down and actually end up with the pieces to make a quilt. That's what this workshop is going to be all about. And the Dogwood Blossoms pattern is included in that workshop, which is kind of fun. So you'd be set up for success to jump into the quilt along if you participate in that. So all of these signups you can find at stringandstory.com or stringandstory.com/shop, which that link is in the caption of this video. All right. Hello, everyone. Let me see who's here. Sue, BZ, Carol, Kathy. Sue, you don't remember what you signed up for? Check your receipt, maybe. I'll also be sending out welcome emails. So hold tight. You'll find out. Hey, Ruth. Ruth, I was so excited to see all the things you jumped in on this afternoon. So that's so exciting. All righty. Shall we talk about perfect fit? This was one of the options for a quilt along for all the things that are going down, and it got outvoted with Dogwood Blossoms. So, but this is a quilt that I love, and it's a quilt that's on my list to make another version of, and one that we haven't really talked about quilting plans for, but it's one I get a lot of questions about as far as quilting plans. So let's talk about quilting plans for perfect fit. In this mini workshop, we're going to take a look at the modern traditional perfect fit quilt pattern and discuss various ways to quilt this bold quilt. Perfect fit is just the right quilt for that hard to quilt for guy in your life or anyone who loves a bold graphic look. Plus, you can customize this quilt to match a room, show off team spirit, or feature favorite colors. It's a great stash buster. Spoiler, it's pre-cut friendly. So just, I'm just saying, you can get your own copy of the perfect fit pattern at stringandstory.com/shop. All right. Pro tip, by the way, as we're going along with this, all of my patterns include a coloring sheet. That's basically a line drawing of the quilt. And the whole idea with that is that you can actually try out your colors before you are making the quilt and as you're deciding on your fabrics. But this is a great opportunity for trying out quilting ideas as well. So just take that same line drawing, either the colored version or the original line drawing, and actually draw your quilting plan on it to see kind of what you think. All right. Now, if you have made perfect fit or a similar rail fence style quilt, so perfect fit is a lot like a rail fence, but it's also like a total mind bender. So it's, like kind of straightforward and kind of complex all at once. But you've struggled to know how to quilt it, then you are in the right place. So as you guys are familiar, if you've heard me talk about quilting plans at any point, there are basically 3 styles of quilting plan, right? We can have an all over design, so just one motif for the whole quilt. We can have a semi-custom quilting plan, and that's something that I usually define as around 3 or 4 motifs. Sometimes that's as few as 2 motifs. If you have like a quilt with a border and you do 1 motif in the center of the quilt, but you do something different with the border, I would consider that semi-custom as well. And then fully custom, where you're just going to get all kinds of crazy, okay? And you're going to ignore seam lines. You're going to treat each individual little bit of the quilt as its own jam. Like, you just get real complicated on it, right? That's often 4 or 5 plus motifs, right? So let's take a quick look at all over designs. Sue, I love that you say it's a mind bender for sure. This was my first quilt pattern, but honestly, John designed it more than I did. He loves mind benders. So this was kind of his idea, morphing off of some like patterns that we'd seen on like slide backgrounds at church. So he was like, that's kind of cool. I want to play around with that design. And then he was like, you should turn this into a quilt. So there you go. All right, all over design. Here is my full-size version of Perfect Fit. I actually took a nap under this quilt today. So if you would actually leave the optical illusion effect of Perfect Fit alone and let that shine, then a simple all-over quilting motif is the way to go. Geometric options include straight lines, a grid, square spirals, which is what I actually did on this quilt. So just simple square spirals that connect to each other and fill in space. Or you could get fancy with swirls or even a feather meander if you wanted an interesting contrast between the like hard geometry of the piecing and a more organic quilting pattern without it actually getting too complicated. I would love to make another perfect fit quilt in the near future. And I'm definitely thinking about the idea of doing a feather meander all over it, because it would just be very interesting to have those textural contrasts, right? Next, we could have a semi-custom design, all right? So this is something that I did on my prototype for Perfect Fit. When I was first designing this, I made a baby quilt size version that Jim uses when we're in the car. And I did a semi-custom design on this quilt. I'd recommend choosing a different motif for each color of the piecing. Really play around with this and get some fun contrast going. Maybe some straight lines in one or spiral chains in the next, a feather in the last, or do 3 different shape chains. So here you can see that I did, it's not really a shape chain. It's more just a square spiral in general, but basically doing squares or square spirals like the one you see pictured here in one, similar idea, but with circles in another and triangles in the third. Or 3 different border motifs. You could do ribbon candy, wishbones, and switchbacks. It's a great time to practice different sets of motifs. And like I said, this is a pre-cut friendly quilt. So it's a nice width for practicing some of those border motifs, right? And you can get awesome texture on your quilt. You can't really see it in this photo, but there actually is a little section of this quilt where instead of the straight lines, I did feathers. And it looks really cool. I really like how it turned out. So there's a lot of things you can play around with using kind of the natural lines of this quilt. Now, if you are in Free Motion Quilting Academy, we talked recently about using ditches to travel when you are quilting, and that is definitely something you want to keep in mind when you're quilting something like Perfect Fit, because each section of each color doesn't touch itself, right? So you either need to make a plan where you can be transitioning seamlessly between different motifs that you're quilting in the different colors of your quilt, or you'll be traveling in the ditch for each one. This is an instance where I found variegated thread to be really helpful. With the square spirals that I did on my bigger version of Perfect Fit, I used a black, white, and gray variegated thread, so I didn't feel like I had to change threads as I moved around the quilt, and I didn't have to worry about the thread showing up too much in any one section, because about the time I'd be like, oh man, you can really see that stitching, the color of the thread would change, right? So it smoothed out that effect quite a lot, all right? Finally, fully custom designs. If you took the Intro to Ruler Work workshop with me back in January, you may recognize this quilting plan as one that I drew at the end of our time together, just kind of playing around. It's one that I think would look really cool as a custom, super fancy quilting plan on really any quilt. And it's one that came to mind as I was thinking about quilting plans for custom quilting Perfect Fit. Really, the way to custom quilt Perfect Fit would be to totally ignore the seam lines and to treat it as some sort of fancy geometric background to your own individualized quilting plan. So why not just treat this basically as a whole cloth and do something abstract and fascinating on top of it? I think that could create a really cool effect. All right. Now, I blazed through that quickly, so I want to make sure that I have some time here for questions. If you are feeling excited about making or quilting Perfect Fit or quilt like it, or if you found this insightful, go ahead and tap the heart for me, but also drop your questions down in the comments. I think mind bender or brain teaser quilts can be really tricky to make quilting plans for. I know I really agonized when I first made Perfect Fit because I wanted to show off that piecing, but I tend to be someone who likes dense quilting. And it's only been more recently that I've been able to see some more possibilities for how to quilt this quilt. So if you have made this quilt or one like it and have questions about how to kind of keep going, or if you've got an idea but you're just not sure, feel free to go ahead and drop that in the comments, okay? Remember that we always want to make our quilting plans on paper before we actually work on the quilt itself. I mentioned this up at the top when I talked about how all of my patterns come with a line drawing, right? They come with a coloring sheet, and guys, been in the house too long. I can't even talk anymore. It serves a dual purpose, that it can help you choose your colors and fabrics on the front end of the quilt top making process, but then it can also serve to help you make your quilting plan on the back end. Don't be afraid to draw out several different options of quilting plan and see which one you like best, right? Don't be afraid to, just like when you're painting a room, of putting different, stripes up on the wall and kind of leaving them there and walking past them for a couple of days and seeing how they change in the light, right? Don't be afraid to do the same thing with quilting plans for this quilt. One last tip before we kind of wrap up, unless you guys have any questions, is don't forget when you're choosing your thread color, whether you're using a solid thread or a variegated thread, to actually unwind the thread from the spool and lay it across the quilt top to see how it's going to blend. A quilt like Perfect Fit, where you're going to have 3 very stark color contrasts, most likely, right? That's kind of the idea of the geometry of that, by having stark contrast between your colors. But the challenge with that can be in choosing thread, especially if you're wanting to do an all over design and you're not wanting to change thread a whole bunch and you're not wanting the thread to stand out too much. So don't be afraid to actually unwind your thread from the spool and lay it out across what you're doing to see if it's going to blend the way that you want it to blend. Just putting the spool itself down on top of the quilt, you don't actually get an idea of the thickness of the thread and how that's going to actually sink into the fabric as you stitch along, right? All right, let's see. Sue says, even before Sue, Marie says, I can do a quilting plan for a table runner, but now you're going for a lap quilt and you're scared. Marie, what makes you feel scared about it? Are you trying to do an all-over design, a semi-custom, or a custom design? What kind of quilt is it? What about that process feels overwhelming? That's a great question. Sue also says, my quilting plans to be a starting point only, and then you're going to wing it. You know, I think making a quilting plan is a lot like cooking, right? That there's always an element of like pivot on the spot, right? Like you make a plan, but you get into the thick of things and it almost always kind of evolves, right? Like maybe you don't have fresh garlic, so you end up digging through the fridge or the pantry for minced or dried garlic. Or maybe you just decide like, oh, wait, I bought, salted chicken broth instead of unsalted. So maybe I'm not going to put salt in and we'll just salt it at the table if it needs it, right? Like, I think there is always that element of pivoting on the spot. So I think that's really encouraging, Sue. Thank you for sharing that, because yes, I do want you to make your quilting plan on paper. It is a map. It is not a binding contract, right? Just like when we go on a trip, right? Like if I'm going to assume I'm not the only one who does this, that I will put my destination into my maps. But if it's a destination either that I've been before or that's in an area that I'm somewhat familiar with, I will not hesitate to disobey my GPS and let it sort itself out, right? It's the same kind of thing when we make our quilting plan. It gives us an idea of where we're headed, how we're going to get there, gives us a starting place so that we can focus on the act of quilting itself and not be full of anxiety about like, how am I getting from point A to point B? But sometimes we just kind of throw it out the window, right? It's rare that I throw an entire quilting plan out the window, but there definitely are times when I will kind of pivot mid-quilt, or there have been times where maybe I do, especially if I'm doing a quilting plan where it's block by block, right? And I do the first block and I'm like, that is entirely too complicated, or that is entirely whatever. And I change it for the next block. And so then there's kind of one block that's just a little bit different than all the rest. And I'm like, it'll wash out. It'll be fine, right? Lots of grace. There's lots of grace in this process. Also, if you are not familiar with the concept of making quilting plans and you're just getting started, Marie, I think this may be what you're encountering. If you are just making a quilting plan for the first time or the second time, like this is something new to you, it's a muscle that has to be exercised, right? It gets easier with practice. It's the decision making. Like decision making takes way more energy than we think it does, right? And so as you scale that thing up, it can feel bigger, but it'll get better with practice. Let's see. Marie says there are plain blocks and pieced blocks, and you do a brain freeze. Press on through, Marie. You can do it. And Marie, like I said, don't be afraid to draw out several and live with them for a while. Draw out several, post them in the Quilting Rockstars, get some feedback from people. If you're really just stuck, like post a picture of your actual quilt in the Quilting Rockstars and say, I think I kind of want to do something kind of like this, but I'm really struggling just to get it on paper. What do you guys think? Right? And get some dialogue going, because sometimes we just need a sounding board, right? Whether that's with Perfect Fit or any other quilt that we're making a quilting plan for. Okay. Thank you guys so much for being this. I hinted this at the top, but whichever plan appeals to you. Oh yes, we already said this. Don't be afraid to do it on paper first. Make yourself a roadmap. Now, are you wanting to make your own Perfect Fit quilt? You can get the pattern at stringandstory.com/shop. And again, that link is also included in the caption of this video. I would be delighted to see some new Perfect Fit quilts popping up as we are all on quarantine. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. This has been just a quick little check-in to talk through today's blog post. If you'd like to actually see all these photos and everything written out, not in video form, but in a static blog post form, there's a link to the video or to the blog in the caption of this video as well. And if you have thoughts on that, I would love for you to leave comments over there on my website. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight. Oh, Sue asked, do you ever make a practice block and try out your plan? Yes. Sue, this is a great question. Now, I will say, disclaimer, this does not work super well with Perfect Fit because there are a lot of different blocks in Perfect Fit that go together. And Sue, you're familiar with this because you've made the quilt, that go together in order to make that mind bender pattern, right? You've got full blocks and partial blocks, and it's kind of complicated. That's why I have the baby size version that I made when I was designing the quilt, because I couldn't just make a block to make sure it worked. I had to make a small version. But in general, because most quilts are not that way, yes, I frequently will make just a block. And I turn those into either mug rugs. Like I'll actually quilt the block and bind it, and I'll turn it either into a mug rug so I can have them laying around my house, because my husband, guys, this is just one of those silly things. But John, if there's a coaster he will set the hot cup of coffee or the sweating iced tea next to the coaster. But if I make a mug rug, it's a lot harder for him to miss. Pro tip, if your husband does this, or if you do this, or if your child does this, right? Like, so I'll either make them into mug rugs, or more frequently, I'll actually put a little tiny hanging sleeve on the back, and I keep quilts hanging on my front door. So just single block quilts that hang on my front door. Most of those were practice blocks that I was trying out a quilting plan. And then I just bound them and turned them into something I could hang instead of a wreath. So yeah, perfect. Great question. Guys, thanks for being here. This has been delightful. As I mentioned at the top, we are quarantined here, so it's nice to be with people, even virtually. And don't forget to head over to the website to see the quilt along, the finish along, and the workshop that are all going down this weekend. I'm really excited about all those. And I'm actually about to head to my sewing room to finally decide what my finish along projects will be. As a complete side note, we'll talk about this more on Saturday night during social hour. But if you are also cooped up and quarantined and you want to do more than one project per whip for the finish along, that's totally fine. Okay. I will be getting that sign up sheet out to those of you who are registered for that soon. Things have just been a little bit crazy around here, as you guys know. So we are in a season of giving ourselves and each other exceptional amounts of grace, hopefully getting lots and lots of sewing done. And I will see you guys inside the Quilting Rockstars Facebook group at 8 p.m. Eastern on Saturday for social hour. All right, guys, can't wait to see all y'all signing up for the things coming up. Hope I'll see some new perfect fit quilts popping up as well. And I hope that all of you have a fabulous and very safe evening. Mwah.